Okay, so all week long, since around like Tuesday or Monday, I was being spammed by so many people letting me know that there was a possibility that ReZero would not have an episode for 3 weeks in a row because of a tennis match. And when I heard this news, honestly, I was just like, no, please don't tell me I'm gonna have to wait 3 weeks to see the continuation after what happened last week. I was like, don't do this to me. Like, ReZero, that was a fucking horrible cliffhanger, and if I had to wait 3 weeks for the next episode, I was gonna be kind of upset, and so I was waiting until today to see if the episode would actually come out. Thankfully, Crunchyroll actually announced a couple days ago that they would be releasing the episode, so that's kind of why I didn't put a video out on it. Last week's episode was by far one of my personal favorite episodes of ReZero, but I need to retract that statement, and I need to say that I think this episode is probably one of my personal best now, because this episode blew all my expectations out of the water, because when I saw the end of last week's episode, I thought that Subaru, he finally just got over that he needed to die. For instance, committing suicide for he can reset everything and help everybody else out. And I talked well in depth about that, of how, you know, he went against, like, the natural human reaction. I talked about, you know, how his response was. It was actually a real human response, because he finally broke down after constantly working up these relationships, and then they're just gone like a snap of the finger after you die. I mean, I talked all about that, so I'm not going to really dive completely back into that. But however, I did not expect this episode, to expand upon what last week's episode did, which was very brilliant by Studio White Fox. They did a very good job with the atmosphere that last week's episode had. They did not waste the potential character development that Subaru could have gotten, and they used that potential in this episode. They used it to the absolute fullest, and let me get into what that is. When Subaru is in the middle of this episode, everything looks fine. Like, he's doing everything he can to make sure that everything is going right. He wants to save the twins, you know, he wants to save Amelia, he wants to save himself, he wants to figure out who put on the curse, different things like that. He's just trying to get as much information, but also he kind of knows what he needs to do. And he's putting up this facade the entire episode with constantly trying to hide his real emotions. Like, he's constantly acting like, oh, I'm happy, everything is fine, you know, I know where everything is. He's just trying to do everything to make it look like he is trying to be all fine and well, but his actions showed that it was someone that was overburdened and doing way too much. He was just, his back was pretty much breaking from all the pressure. And it finally got to him. I mean, it doesn't just go away. Subaru, he doesn't forget what happened in the previous lives he had. He doesn't forget that. He doesn't forget how he died. He doesn't forget the faces, the conversations. He doesn't forget none of that. So he constantly carries this weight over into his next life. And it actually once again carries over some of the trauma he had. And he finally once again lets out of his emotions to someone, for instance Amelia, and lets her know exactly how he truly feels. I like how last week's episode, right at the beginning, it had it to where Subaru was spilling his guts to one of the twins and just saying, like, you know how it feels to constantly lose all these relationships and all that, how it feels to constantly repeat and all this. He's letting out all of his feelings. He was trying to let it out to one of the twins before he was about to die, but then he got denied and he died anyways, and then everybody forgot about it, but he continued on remembering. And in this episode, it's kind of like the exact opposite of that situation. It's a more happier tone. For instance, the last week's episode is more tragic because he let out his emotions, but then he died. In this episode, he gets a lap pillow, which 10 out of 10, by the way, I'll get in that in a moment, but he gets a lap pillow, and then Amelia listens to Subaru as he finally lets out his real emotions, and he gets to say everything he wants until the point he cries himself to sleep. And it's not the most manly thing ever, but I mean, he needed to let his emotions out. This poor man is overburdened and his back is breaking from all the pressure because he's died over and over after what was said last week by Amelia and the twins and what happened to him in, you know, his previous life. It was just a very sad situation, and so this just does not go away when he comes back. It doesn't, because he still has the chance of being killed. And knowing that one of the twins will kill him, that is a scary thought. So when he wakes up and realizes that, you know, if he says one wrong thing or does one bad move, he can die right there. And so he knows that he needs to play his cards right, put up a facade, be happy, and throughout the entire episode when he's trying to do that, he gets sick. He feels sick. He feels like he's disgusted with himself because he can't be really happy. He's not really happy at that moment, which makes so much sense, because honestly, thinking about this, would you be happy if you constantly died, got brought back, remembered everything, and then you're around the people that killed you, but you're trying to save the people, and you're trying to be happy because of it, just to make sure everything is set nice and straight? I mean, think about that for a second. I mean, you know, majority of people I don't think would be necessarily happy. They'd probably be really fucking miserable. They would. So Subaru finally kind of expressing these emotions of how miserable he is, how unhappy he is, how he feels sick, and it finally gets to where he froze up in this episode. That was just a 10 out of 10 execution moment for this entire episode, because I love how Subaru's character is not just one-dimensional, because when I first saw the beginning of this series, I mean, it seemed like a lot of his, you know, reverting times, like going back, it didn't bug him completely, which I kind of slightly mentioned in last week's episode, but he did say he wanted to cherish his life because he didn't want to die, but it was never really died into how much it might have bothered someone if they constantly died over and over, and he didn't really express that until last week's episode and this week's episode. And when he finally starts letting out his emotions and stuff, it just shows another side of his character that really adds more characterization and development than we already had. It was an excellent episode to develop his character through all of these, you know, time loops. So besides that, however, there's a couple of scenes in this episode that I need to talk about. For one, there's a magic scene. You have Beatrice in the library, which is very cute, and then the lap pillow, and then also the curse, and then the other witches that were devoured by the jealous witch. So, talking about all this, let's start with the magic. So, the magic point of this episode was very intriguing, very interesting stuff that really got my attention, and I wanted to find out more as much as I can. So, Subaru, he apparently has the attribute of a shadow user, so he can use shadows, and it's mainly a class of all debuffs, where you're silenced and you can't do nothing, or you're blind and you can't see. Subaru, you know, he's actually a shadow user that could do something similar to this, but here is the thing. He, at this time, he really can't use magic. I mean, he expelled all his magic at once when he tried to do something, and it made it to where he was not even able to move. And that caused him to be in a situation where he found out about this little plant that could actually help him out to give him some more mana to where he can move around. So that most likely might be something very important later on down the road. I could see something like that being important, that little, you know, bean or whatever that Amelia fed Subaru. But the next thing, though, is talking about the magic in general that was used against him. It seems like Subaru has PTSD. I mean, the way he got the magic used on him, the shadow magic from Puck, and then he couldn't see anything, it was so creepy because it shows you that he still currently is scared. He has all this fear about what happened in last week's episode. It just goes to emphasize that point of how he cannot really tell anyone about what is going on. Because if you remember, in last week's episode, when he tried to say, like, about a situation of how he's been dying and, you know, he remembers everything, he got stopped, like, time completely froze, and when he had that hand come out about to, like, rip out his heart or something or crush his heart, well, because of that, we know with this episode, that scene really put the fear of God in him, because he did not want to experience that ever again. So it shows you how much fear he had at that moment in last week's episode, because it emphasizes that when he finally gets out of that magic, he has sweat coming down his face. So yeah, clearly, that scene, that one moment of his life when he tried to say something, scared the shit out of him, and which will probably never make him want to say something ever again. So that right there goes to show us what emotions he truly has at the moment, and he probably won't ever try to say something ever again. He probably won't, because that's how scared he was. So once again, more natural human reaction. Now, the lap pillow. Okay, so the lap pillow, very cute. I've already talked about, you know, the characterization of how he spilled his guts out and all that. I'm fine with that. I've already talked about that, but I just want to talk about the romantic moment. It was so sweet seeing Amelia actually helping out Subaru, letting him, you know, lay his head on her lap. And, I mean, I know it was kind of like fan service in a way, but I felt like this fan service was the proper fan service that series need to kind of do. Because Subaru, he's been suffering so much, so many episodes, he's died constantly, and seeing how he finally got some form of happiness for a moment, it made me smile. I was really happy to see him be somewhat happy. And so that lap pillow, very romantic, and seeing how she does care for him, and she saw right through him of how he had this facade on the entire episode, it goes to show you that he's easy to read in a way. So yeah, the lap pillow, 10 out of 10. Definitely one of the best moments of the episode, besides the other scenes when it came to the characterization and development for Subaru. Now, when it comes to Beatrice, oh my god, Beatrice is so fucking amazing. I neglected to talk much about Beatrice because I was so into talking about Subaru as a character last week, which it didn't even cross my mind, and it was an error on my part. I just want to say real quick, I am very sorry for not talking much about Beatrice in last week's episode, and I want to correct that mistake with this week's episode. So Beatrice has really grown on me as a character, clearly. I mean, if it wasn't for her, Subaru wouldn't be hopeful at this time. He wouldn't have done kind of the things he did in the last week's episode to try to change things. He realized what he wants to do, and thanks to Beatrice, he was able to kind of come to terms with that and try to go and continue moving forward. And in this episode, he comes back to Beatrice. He's happy-go-lucky with her. He's being a very nice person. He even gives her a pet name, which is very cute, by the way. I think he said, like, Beko or Bako or whatever, but it was very cute. It was a very wonderful name he gave her, and I just couldn't help but laughing my ass off when he grabbed her up like a little child and all that. I was just like laughing so much, and seeing this connection between these two characters, it makes me happy because he has someone to rely on, someone that he could talk to, someone that he normally can't, you know, talk to others. Like, he can't talk to everybody else, but he at the very least can relay some of his issues there up alone with nobody watching him. It's just him and Beatrice in that room, since normally people can't enter that room. So let me know your thoughts in the comments below. You all have a wonderful day or night wherever you live. Please be safe. Chibi out.